President Trump created a self-inflicted crisis in his war with Iran, and you're paying the price. The national average for a gallon of regular gas is now $4.14. In fact, with the war, President Trump has triggered the largest one-month gas price increase in decades. Those soaring gas prices also fueled a spike in inflation to 3.3% because of Trump's war of choice. And frustration with higher prices pushed consumer sentiment to an historic low. But don't just take it from me. MS Now's Rosa Flores caught up with some folks at a gas station in Houston this week.
I don't even want to go anywhere because I just want to stay home and not spend money on gas.
There's a lot of people that they got to make choices now. You know, that is it gas? Is it food on the table? How do I get to work?
Everybody's depressed. Everybody's stressing out. Everybody's scared. Everybody's afraid. You know, we don't know what's going to happen next. You know, it's just very scary. We're living in shaky times.
Joining us now, Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He's a member of the Senate Committee on Armed Services. Senator Blumenthal, welcome back to the weekend. We're going to get to gas prices and the economy in a moment, but I want to start with Iran. Let me play for you what the president said yesterday. I believe this was on his way to Miami for that UFC fight, but was asked about potential of a deal with Iran. Watch this.
They probably have a couple of mines in the water. We have minesweepers out there. We're sweeping the strait. In addition to that, we're negotiating. Whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me.
So as we now know, the Vice President of the United States, after 21 hours being in Islamabad, failed to come up with any kind of deal with the Iranians. Your reaction to the president's comments there and your reaction to the failure of a deal coming out of Islamabad?
Well, first, as to the failure of a full comprehensive deal coming out of 24 hours or even 21 hours of talks, thinking that decades of deep differences were going to be resolved in a single session was totally unrealistic. The good news is nobody slammed the door on continuing talks, and the negotiations should continue because Donald Trump has put our economy in a world of hurt. And the seismic shock of the continued grip of Iran on the Strait of Hormuz is going to ripple through the global economy like a tsunami. It isn't just the fuel and food prices that are going to be affected, but everything from mattresses to medical equipment, automobiles, semiconductors. Everyday life is going to be more expensive. And so the president saying it isn't going to make a difference is simply more bluster and blindness to the everyday effects of economic pain on consumers and the people of America.
Senator, in that sound that came right before we started asking you questions, Lillian, it seems, said it's just very scary. We're living in shaky times. We don't know what's going to happen next. And I think for people who've never or don't know anyone who work hourly, who live paycheck to paycheck, who are struggling to put food on the table, also struggling to decide how do they rob Peter to pay Paul on health care. How do you explain to your colleagues, Republicans, but also Democrats in this White House, that the hurt that the American people are feeling is unfair? It is something that people like you, members of Congress, and this White House could fix. Maybe not easily, but, sitting down and actually getting to some of these issues. What are the conversations you're having with them behind closed doors about the pain that Americans are feeling? Because, folks get on TV and they start saying, oh, we get it, they're hurting. But the hurt in these folks' voices is real. They don't know how they're going to pay their bills. They don't know how they're going to live. This is a life or death situation for a lot of Americans.
Scary is the right word. As I go around Connecticut, where I've been for the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure it's true of my colleagues as well, people are really deeply anxious about the future the uncertainty and the instability, not only of the economy, but of what's happening in the world. And the president's indifference is really demented. It is a sign of lack of caring and compassion, which is true, and of the corruption. We're seeing it in the poly-market bets on the possibility of talks succeeding, which are probably based on insider information, which ought to be investigated. People have a deep distrust of this White House. And my colleagues behind closed doors on the Republican side are more and more worried about the effects of this pain and fear on the coming elections so far as they're concerned. And they recognize they are headed toward disaster right now if this war is resumed with bombing. Let's face the stark reality. Bombing alone has achieved none of the president's objectives, whether it is securing the enriched uranium or destroying Iran's missile capacity or changing the regime or stopping its proxies from terror. And it won't stop any of the objectives because none of them can be achieved from 30,000 feet. So diplomacy and negotiations are the only path toward peace here.
Senator, if you do have eventually the opportunity to weigh in on a nuclear agreement, an agreement with Iran, a long-term one, via the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, something that Marco Rubio actually co-sponsored in 2015 so that Congress had the ability to weigh in and be a check on President Obama's JCPOA. What is the major red line for you on something that you would not support?
Well, first of all, let's focus on Congress's role. Congress should be approving and should be required to approve any agreement that comes out of these negotiations. Congress should be required to approve any resumption of the war if the negotiations failed. The War Powers Resolution should be approved this week when it comes to the floor. There should be no additional appropriations. The president's talked about $200 billion in a supplemental. None of it. I would vote against it because Congress's role here has been subsumed and ignored. So I think Congress should play a role. And for me, there are some red lines in going back to the 3% figure on enriched uranium, on inspection. A nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. I think that's a principle that ought to elicit broad consensus. It has in the past. A nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat, not only to the Israelis, but to us as well.